Greetings, all of you freelancers yearning to be financially stress-free. It's time to take control. I'm Tanya Rapley. Welcome to a new series from State Farm and Let's Start Today. This is where you'll find the tools, support, and education you need to take control of your finances today and reach your goals for tomorrow. These helpful courses are inspired by an ever-evolving learning lab known as Nextdoor State Farm. And speaking of Nextdoor, I'm here with John, who is a financial coach at Nextdoor State Farm.
Thanks for having me.
And Crystal, who is a State Farm agent.
Thanks for having me here.
Thank you guys for joining me. So today's course is called Financial Foundation for Freelancers. Are you guys ready to enlighten and empower?
Yeah, let's get to it.
All right, well, before we do that, I want to go over the agenda, which is an overview of the freelance world, identifying your financial goals as a freelancer, creating that budget and a budget overview for freelancers. Wait, I don't work for a corporation, and credit factors and action steps for freelancers. How's that sound to you guys?
Sounds great.
Good.
All right, so let's have some fun. Let's dig into it. First things first, what is a freelancer?
Freelancer essentially is somebody that doesn't work for a corporation or really doesn't work for anyone else, right? They work for themselves, typically working 1099, contract types of gigs, and they kind of have to look out for themselves.
You don't have that team that maybe a traditional entrepreneur might have or someone who works for a corporation. It's really you, and decisions start and fall with you.
Exactly.
Let's have a look at what we've learned. So in creating your financial goals as a freelancer, there are probably different things you want to take into consideration, but you still want to set those goals, right?
Absolutely. I mean, freelancer or not, your goals are going to be really important because without them, you don't really know what you're striving for. You don't know if you've accomplished something without setting those goals to begin with.
Right. How do you know if freelancing is working for you?
Right.
Yeah. You got to set those checkpoints, I call them. You know, like checkpoints in my career, where I'm at. Do I need to add a team? Can I do this alone? So you have to understand the next levels or the next steps that you're taking. So goal setting is the foundation of everything.
Yeah, and just because you're a freelancer now doesn't mean that you have goals of growing and creating a business and growing that business so that you have a team to help you make decisions. So that might be a financial goal you want to set. But regardless of what your goal is, we always want to make sure that we're writing that goal out, right?
Absolutely.
If you don't write it down, it's not real.
I mean, writing it down is a great step. You want to make it real. Not only that, but being very tactical with it. So, you know, you may say that I want to have a team of 5 people within the next 3 years. That's great. You always want to have it be tied to a time frame or a dollar amount, depending on when that goal is, to make it a lot easier to actually build that action plan.
Yeah, and freelancers have goals. I know my husband is a freelancer, and we still have goals. We still want to buy a house. We still want to do things. So freelancers have goals too.
When you talk about setting those short-term and long-term goals, kind of like buying a house, I'm pretty sure it's a short-term goal. But then long-term, you might be like, I want to buy real estate. I want to buy, you know, this
a building that I can work out of. And
so, but how do you get there? Like, what are the goals that you have to set to get there, the steps that happen?
And I'm happy you said that, Crystal, because I think that sometimes we have to look at our goals as, what are the steps? We break them down. So we say, okay, I need to save this amount of money. So my long-term goal is to buy a building, but my short-term goal might be to pay off my debt so that I can get approved for that building, and then build my emergency fund so that I can begin to focus on saving for that building. So your goals, you know, they happen in steps.
And then a good rule of thumb as far as those short, medium, and long-term goals is typically we think of a short-term goal within the next 12 months or so, medium term about a year to 5 years, and anything longer than 5 years, consider that maybe a long-term goal.
Yeah, so for the freelancer who's like, oh man, I've never set any goals, what do you guys think they should do? What is a good rule of thumb for getting your first goal out there?
Write it down as soon as possible. They call me the Post-it girl in my office because I always, like, if I have a thought in my head or something that I see I want to do or accomplish, I write it down immediately so I can get it out of my head onto paper and see it in front of me.
Yeah, and
so,
committing it to memory.
Yeah, yeah. So it's just a commitment.
Yeah, it's so powerful when you commit that goal to memory and say, you know what, I'm going to put this everywhere that I look so that I can make sure I don't forget about this goal.
Yep, bathroom mirror, your computer at work, that way you just see it all day, every day.
It's actually right next to my closet. So when I stop and look to the right, my goals are right there staring me in my face. They are eye level and right there staring me in my face.
Yeah, you know, one of the big waves right now is the big vision board parties. So that's like setting short-term and long-term goals, you know? So that's awesome to do. If you're a freelancer, I mean, sometimes you may not want to communicate, but it's best to kind of collaborate with other freelancers and visualize together.
I don't think a lot of people realize, like, taking it outside of your home and putting it on your phone or somewhere that you look regularly. So, like, every time you go to unlock that screen, your goals and dreams are staring you in the face.
Yeah.
Nothing like that to remind you, hey, get it together.
Yeah, right.
So what we're saying essentially is that freelancing isn't much different from a traditional job. You still need to set those goals and make sure that you're doing everything in your power to achieving them. Let's have a look at what we've learned. All right, so now we have that goal. We need a budget, right? Because a budget is that plan. So budgeting for freelancers, how different is it?
A budget's a budget. But as a freelancer, you're probably going to want to have a budget for personal and a budget for business. So having those things separate makes it a lot easier on a day-to-day basis, and especially when you go talk to the tax man, right? Making it easier when it comes to that. But the building blocks of the budget starts essentially with fixed expenses.
Yeah.
These are expenses that you know you're going to have every single month. They typically don't have a lot of short-term flexibility. And for these, think your rent or your mortgage or your bills, cell phone bills. And keep in mind, maybe you have some expenses that are going to be for the business. And like I said, that might be a reason why you want to have those separate.
Yeah, and then you have your variable expenses. So your fixed expenses, you can count on those being the same every month. Your variable expenses, you can count on having those bills each month, but sometimes they fluctuate. So that might be, you know, your electricity, or it could be your gas if you live somewhere where they have gas, or it could range. Even if you have, you know, someone who works contract with you, so looking at a business, if you have someone who works contract with you and their hours fluctuate, so maybe this month they helped you for 5 hours, but last month they helped you for 12 hours, that's going to fluctuate as well. It's still an expense, but it's not the same each and every month.
That's a great point. One of the biggest things I think that you had mentioned, John, is keeping the personal and the freelancer budget separate. Because a lot of times the freelancers, because they're flying solo, they think all the bills are combined.
Yeah.
But you have to, that's going back to setting those goals, because if you're setting goals for your personal life and your freelancer life, they look totally different.
Yeah,
so the
definitely.
budget should look totally different. The fixed expenses should look different. The variable will look different as well. You know, especially with marketing and things of that nature, building your brand. So you have to be aware of those types of things and the expenses that you will actually face.
Yeah, definitely. And then we have those non-monthly. So slightly different from the variable expenses, which you can count on to happen every month. You have those non-monthly expenses. So the non-monthly expenses, they might happen, you know, 6 months out the year, 3 months out the year, 2 months out the year. That might be, you know, a website redesign project, or that might be a personal expense, such as going away for holiday vacation with your family, or participating in a wedding or attending a wedding. You want to make sure that you're budgeting for those things.
Yeah, and a simple way to think about that is it's a non-monthly expense. You know you're going to pay for it, whether it's an annual web hosting fee or whether it's a wedding you've got to get to. How much is that expense? How far away is it? And then divide the expense by how far away it is, and that'll give you a good idea of how much you should be setting aside each month for that particular expense.
You know, one that gets me every year is domain registration. I forget about my domain registration yearly, but now I've had to write it down and say, Tanya, you know what? Every year,
you know what's going to happen.
You're going to have to pay this, because we forget about those things because we're not paying them monthly, but it doesn't mean they don't need to be paid.
Exactly.
It's those little things, you know? And as we talked about taking a closer look at our budgets, when you're a freelancer, your income fluctuates.
Yeah.
So if you have these fixed, these variables, and then you have these non-monthly bills, how do you prepare for that? So having that budget set aside, one of the things that I do is running a business, I make sure that I take a couple of months, I average that out. What does that look like with my income coming in? What are those types of different expenses that I have? And I try to stick to those different things so that I know this hard number, you know?
Yeah,
so as a freelancer, you need to know that hard number so that you don't go over or below it, you know? Just because you may have that wonderful month, you know?
And I love that about being about creating a budget, right? Because when you create a budget and you understand what your expenses are, you have that baseline number. No matter what happens, I need to bring in this income each month. And speaking of income, it's important to understand as a freelancer, your income is slightly different. It may fluctuate, but your income's not really your income because now you have business expenses that you need to operate.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's the money coming in and the expenses that you have, business and personal, you're going to take that away from the income, and then hopefully we have a positive number left over at the end of the month, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be your disposable income. So that's going to be money, or we also call that money for our goals. So whether that's a personal goal, whether that's putting money back into the business, ramping up marketing, buying more inventory, whatever that looks like, we want to end up having more money come in than the expenses that are going out.
Yeah, because then you're operating in the negatives.
Yeah. Don't want to do that.
And that is stressful. That definitely is stressful. And I know that sometimes people say, well, as a freelancer, I don't have a set income each month. It fluctuates. Some months are amazing. And some months I'm wondering, why do I even do this? So when it comes to setting some of those goals, like your emergency fund and making sure that you're saving or contributing to your retirement, you can do a percentage-based allocation instead of, that flat dollar amount that you might have if you had a consistent income.
And another thing that, like you talked about, the emergency fund, there could also be different types of fund, like your growth fund as well, or things such as if you have a branding fund, like marketing, you can have money when you have that great month. I'm going to put X, Y, Z into this account, so you can kind of be prepared for those types of things. So budgeting out when you're getting that big check, not using it as boat money, I call it. Trying to buy everything you can because you won for the month, so just preparing.
And definitely, John, I'm sure that you probably see customers all the time who, their freelancers are doing pretty good, but they want to make sure they're doing right by their budget and to make sure they're saving and so forth. So as far as saving for freelancers, what is a good emergency fund? Because I think a lot of people are confused by that.
So yeah, emergency fund, it's a term we've probably all heard of before. Ideally, it's anywhere from 3, 6, or 9 months of essential living expenses. So if you take a look at your budget, and I encourage you to go home, write down all of the fixed expenses, write down all of your variable expenses. Like Crystal said, take a look at a good 2-3 month average of basically where your money's been going.
Yeah.
This gives you a good baseline of seeing, kind of where the money's been going to help you inform you of maybe decisions you want to make moving forward, right? So like I said, write it all down and put stars next to all the expenses that every single month you have to have.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
That'll give you a good idea of kind of what is 1 month of essential living expenses, and then think of that 3, 6, or 9, or any of the months in between, really whatever lets you sleep at night, is what an end goal would be for an emergency fund. Now, of course, if you're thinking 6, 7, 8, 9 months, that can be a pretty big number. Try not to get intimidated with that. Just having a separate account, like you guys were talking about before, but one that's specifically for emergencies. And when we're talking emergencies, we're basically talking unexpected car repair, unexpected home repair, unexpected medical expenses, and the big one, loss of income, lose your job, which is especially important as a freelancer because you do have that fluctuating income.
We have stages, right, John? There are these stages that I think freelancers need to be aware of.
Yeah, so being in business for yourself, we think about the budget in 3 stages. Stage 1, taking a look at your budget. We talked about these fixed, variable, non-monthly expenses. Again, just to recap real quick, the fixed being the expenses that happen every single month, typically your bills, variable, those everyday living expenses, and non-monthly expenses being those expenses that don't happen every single month, but you should be setting a little bit aside for each month. And taking a look at those and writing them all down, look at your expenses and put a little star next to the ones that you have to make every single month. Kind of like essentially food and shelter, your bills, you have to pay them. That's like stage 1. Add up all of those expenses and that gives you what we call your break-even number. So ideally, and especially if you're just starting out, that's the number that you want to strive for each month income-wise so that you can at least break even each month.
Yeah.
Stage 2, so once we're comfortable with that, you start to make a little bit more money, and then hopefully you're able to start putting a little bit more of these expenses back in. Maybe you're able to dine out a little bit more, shop a little bit more. Essentially, adding a little bit more than just what the stars are, right?
Yeah, you're doing a little bit. You're actually starting to enjoy your money a little
Exactly,
more.
exactly. And then we're making more money, doing more business. Then we get to stage 3, which we call the Shangri-La of stages. You're making enough money at this point that you actually have decided a number that you're going to pay yourself each month, and basically you're paying yourself a salary out of the income that your freelance gigs are generating. and just sticking to that, and then that's where you want to get to, right? That's the stage 3 that you're striving for.
Yeah, that's the sweet spot. So as a freelancer, it's probably likely that you'll have a personal budget and you'll also have a business budget so that you can achieve your personal goals and your business goals. Let's have a look at what we've learned. Okay, so now we have that budget, but wait, I don't work for a corporation. As a freelancer, what are things that we can do to navigate that space between working for a corporation, working for yourself, not fully operating your business? You still have basic needs, right?
Yeah, I mean, I like to call this BYOB. Bring your own benefits, right?
I love that.
So,
I love that.
Typically when you work for a corporation, things like health insurance, life insurance, disability, retirement, those things are more often than not included. So, I mean, we can just kind of go through and hit a few key points on these. You know, health insurance is a big one. So as far as what the rules are for health insurance, I'd encourage everybody to go research that on their own and what's going to apply to them. But a couple of just kind of break down some jargon with health insurance. A lot of times you'll see something called a copay, and that's typically when you go to a doctor's office, what, if anything, will you have to pay out of pocket. Coinsurance, which is just the percentage of the bill that you'll have to pay after you've met your deductible. And then the two big terms that apply to a lot of insurance policies, deductible and premium, which the deductible is what do you have to pay out of pocket before the insurance kicks in, so to speak. And then premium is what you have to pay month to month or annually, however that's set up to essentially keep the insurance active.
Yeah, and I think you have to choose what works for your family, right?
Yeah, I agree with that because sometimes we kind of disregard about our health and how serious that is. So when you think about if something happens, because you are a freelancer, you're the main breadwinner.
Yeah.
What do you have in place to get you back active and back into the workforce?
Yeah.
So you have to pre-plan for that as well. That's a part of setting your goals as well. Like if something happens, what's my plan B?
Yeah.
How do I jump back from that? So understanding and researching and seeing what best fits for you, especially in the healthcare field, you gotta know what your options are.
Yeah, and there's a lot of options out there, and it can seem daunting. So by doing your research, it's easier to define, you know, this works for me, this doesn't work for me, and shop around. You know, there are options out there.
Yeah.
And so if we have health insurance, what about life insurance? Because you need life insurance as a freelancer too.
Yeah, I mean, like Crystal just mentioned, it being the sole breadwinner, you know, whether it is just you or whether you have a family with you, and if you are the only person generating income, disability insurance, life insurance, these are big things that you kind of need to sit down and have a conversation with yourself or with your family and decide what's going to be right for you. You know, a lot of those same principles apply as far as like the premium to the life insurance policy. How much life insurance do you think you need is going to be a big thing, depending on what sort of, you know, going back to those fixed expenses, the bills, if there's a mortgage.
About how much life insurance you need.
Yeah,
So
something.
if someone's like, you know what, okay, I'm going to get life insurance, how much life insurance do I need?
What I typically do with a customer is look at about 3 years, 3 to 5 years of what can your family survive on? Can they survive for the next 3 to 5 years? And also for your burial as well. And then plus the legacy you built. If you left debt or if you grew a huge company, like say for instance, or if you're a freelancer and you grew a great clientele and there's different types of things that you're leaving behind, how do you protect that? How do you protect anyone coming in or taking it from your family that you left behind? When I think about life insurance and short-term disability and things of that nature, I think about protecting yourself from financial destruction. So these are the things that you protect the legacy you built, and also the disability is protecting your income and you protecting your family as well. Because when you're in those months of not producing for your family, how do you continue to live the lifestyle you built?
Oh, Crystal, let's actually get into that. Let's get into let's get into the disability insurance, because I think a lot of times we talk about, you know, life insurance, we talk about health insurance, but disability insurance is something that is even more valuable for freelancers because your income is not guaranteed. Your retirement is not necessarily guaranteed. Unemployment isn't necessarily guaranteed. So as a freelancer, disability insurance, like I know a lot of people are saying, okay, so What is disability insurance?
The way the disability insurance works is you're going to have what's called an exemption period, which means if you become injured or disabled, there's a certain amount of time before you basically start to get some replacement income. And that's something that you would talk with an insurance agent about as far as how much income you want to be replaced. The more income that you'd want to be replaced, the more that it's probably going to cost. Just like the rest of the insurance world works as far as purchasing that policy, but it's typically relatively inexpensive for what you get out of it.
And like how you said, that elimination period, that falls back into how much do you have saved? Because if you decide, okay, in 30 days I need my check, or in 60 days or 90 days, but have you prepared for that? That's also protecting your finances as well. So when disability comes into play, you have to think about how long would I need this money for? So you have those options of a year to 3 years. You don't have to take the big, huge, large lump sum, but there's always a great thing to at least implement something in place. Do you have something in place if you were to be injured and could not work for a certain period of time?
Yeah.
So having that conversation is pretty hard, but it's an eye-opener too.
Yeah.
And there's options to that. So a lot of freelancers don't understand that by protecting your income and by purchasing disability, so they don't have to dip into like their emergency fund or their savings account and those typical things. This is just another plan B that's set aside for them. So when you're talking about budgeting and things of that nature, are you having something in place that can take care of you and the legacy that you built outside of that? So disability is one of the biggest things that I think that we really don't touch on, because I think one of the biggest things is that a lot of people who go into the workforce, they just assume that their job is always going to be there.
Like, I'll always be okay.
Yeah. And a freelancer, you have to realize you're not going to always have those checks coming in.
Yeah.
And then if you get injured because you're a one-man show, if you stop doing it, who's going to be paying your bills at that time?
You might feel like I can't even afford to pay myself. I can't afford to pay for disability insurance, but I've seen it in action. I had a coworker and their spouse ended up suffering a terminal medical emergency, and they did not realize that they weren't going to be able to work anymore, but they had disability insurance. And for the last years of her life, she ended up relying on that disability insurance to help cover their household bills. And they had built this beautiful life together. But that disability insurance was critical at that time.
Yeah, it's a safety net.
Yeah. The other thing I'd just like to add as far as like building your legacy, if you work for a corporation, a lot of times they're going to have some sort of a retirement plan in place. We've all heard of, 401ks and things like that. Well, an IRA, which stands for Individual Retirement Account, is something that's perfect for a freelancer. That's basically starting your own retirement account, right? And there's two main buckets of this, traditional IRAs and Roth IRAs. It's just basically how are taxes handled.
Yeah.
So super high level, a traditional IRA, generally you'll get some sort of be able to write off what you've put into it, and then you pay taxes when you take it out in retirement. The Roth IRA, you typically pay taxes, the money that goes in is after tax, and it would come out tax-free in retirement. Now obviously, today we're just doing a very high-level overview of what these things are. Do some research on your own, but IRA, individual retirement account, that's perfect for a freelancer to start saving for retirement.
Yes, I'm happy you said that, because you can still save for retirement as a freelancer. I mean, you might decide, I could do this forever. I love the work that I do. I could do it forever. But you still want to have the option of retiring. You might get to forever and be like, I don't want to do this forever.
Yeah, right.
So as a freelancer, you still need to make sure that you're taking care of your basics, and you want to make sure that you're planning for the unforeseen with life insurance, health insurance, disability insurance, and you're still planning for retirement. Let's have a look at what we've learned. Okay, so for our last section, we're going to cover credit factors and action steps for freelancers, because you need credit as a freelancer. I mean, you need credit, period.
The credit score is the thing that we often hear about, and that's the number, 300 to 850. The higher the better. And then your credit report is a whole different thing. So those are two separate things. Your credit report, that's like your transcript of all the classes you took in school, where your credit score is like your final GPA, basically. So everything that's on the report is what dictates that score. And those factors that we had just covered, that's all the stuff you're gonna see on your credit report. And that's what informs what that credit score is going to be.
The way your credit score is factored doesn't change, right, as a freelancer?
Yeah, so there's basically 5 factors that go into your credit score, and they're all weighted a little bit differently. And nothing's going to blow your mind here. A lot of it's going to make sense. But like 35% of your credit score is simply, do you pay your bills on time? 30% of your credit score is what we call a credit utilization ratio. That's just a fancy way of saying, are you maxed out on your credit cards? Basically, your debt to credit. Ideally, you want to be using less than 30% of what your available credit lines are. So right there, paying your bills on time and not being too maxed out, that's 65% of what goes into your credit score. The last 3 aren't completely in our control, so they're not worth as much. 15% of your credit score is your length of credit history. You want that, the longer the better. 10% of your credit score is your credit mix. We look at credit in 2 types of buckets. Revolving credit, which is like your credit cards. You can use them, pay them off, use them. Installment credit, which that's like a car loan, a home loan. There's a certain number of installments and then it's paid off. Ideally, you have a little bit of both. And then the last part is also 10%, and that's what we call credit inquiries, which is basically people looking into your credit. If you want to get a loan, if you want to buy a home, get a new credit card, a lot of times that's going to be what's called a hard hit, and it is going to be a little ding on your credit. Again, only 10% of the overall score. And then there's also what they call a soft hit, which doesn't hurt your credit score. That would be you looking into your own credit, pulling your own credit report, and a lot of times just kind of think of that as junk mail. Any sort of pre-approved things that you get in the mail, that's going to be considered a soft hit. All of this is very important on a personal basis, but also as a freelancer, as you build your business, as you go out and maybe need to get credit or loans, that's all going to be obviously very applicable to you.
Yeah, and the great thing about credit is it's not based on where you work or how much money you bring in. So as a freelancer, that doesn't negatively impact your credit score. But the things that you do as a freelancer, and say you don't have that emergency fund and jobs are slow, and if you miss a few payments on your credit cards, that could actually affect you as a freelancer. But I also wanted to point out that freelancers are more likely to take out small business loans, or you might need to take out a loan to grow your business once you realize, you know, I've kind of tapped out, I'm ready to go to the next level, but I need a little more cash than I have available to me to grow this business. So then you might go apply for a loan, and that's when your credit really matters, because then they're going to look at, okay, so how do you spend your money in your personal life? How are you spending your money as a business owner? And how can we trust you to pay us back, and can we trust you to make that money back?
Especially when you talk about spending, when I think about credit cards and running your business with a credit card, one of the great things I think that's a good tip is utilizing that credit card for those fixed types of bills. So that way you know this is like what my utility bill usually is. So utilizing that credit wisely and then paying it off because you know it's fixed. So you're already prepared for that. That way that you're growing your credit, you're growing the responsibility of using it wisely. And that way you'll have that option to up that limit if you want to, because you've been paying it on time. You know what these fixed bills are that you're utilizing it for. I think that's a great way to use a credit card when you're running a business, especially as a freelancer. Those are healthy tips.
And it helps with cash flow too. You know, say you have this invoicing software that you use and you haven't gotten paid yet by a client, and you need to make sure that you keep that invoicing software up to date and active. So you might want to put that on a credit card so that you can receive the payment, or so that you can pay your team and so forth, so things can continue to function. If you're a freelancer, you might not have a team, but as you grow, you might start to bring on contractors, and you want to be able to pay them in a timely manner, because you want to get your money in a timely manner. The people you owe want to get their money in a timely manner. And sometimes that credit card could help ease that cash flow.
Another thing that everybody can do right now is go to annualcreditreport.com and check out what your credit report looks like. So your score is not going to be on there, but you'll see the report, you'll see everything that's on there. You want to make sure everything's correct and accurate. And a lot of times nowadays, if you already have a credit card, you may have your score for free on that. If not, there's a lot of third-party websites out there that you can get your score for free. Bottom line, you should never pay for your score or your report because you can get the report for free at annualcreditreport.com, and there's a lot of places for the free score too.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to reiterate that, you know, as a freelancer, your credit is important, but if you've had those days, you know, I would love for everyone to have, you know, success in business and success operating on their own, but things happen. And if you've fallen behind, the great thing about credit is that you can rebuild it. Let's have a look at what we've learned. So freelancing might not always be easy, but I think that we have set a pretty strong financial foundation for freelancers to follow.
I agree.
Yeah.
John, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Crystal, thank you for joining me too.
Thanks for having me as well.
Make sure to dig in and explore all of our tools, support, and education. And don't forget to check out all of our other courses. See you soon.